Hi, Torsten Lawrence here to show you two more awesome replpad features, namely the docs function and the source property. We'll dive right in. What we have is docs function per function of a core module. So here we have the readme information printed right into your REPL, and you can easily open it in your browser. The browser navigates right to the documentation of the readme function. Next, we have docs for any node module that you require, which will print the README of that node module right into your REPL and provide you links to open it in your browser. And last but not least, we greatly enhance the source function, which will now not only source the function itself, but it will actually tell you where in the file it is with line numbers. It will tell you where the file is that it is defined in. It will also include comments and JS docs that it finds related to that function. So I hope that this was interesting enough to keep you with us. I'm going to go through this very slowly now and explain everything in detail. So the readme function that we just showed has a docs. Now that is basically only working for core modules. So for core modules, each function has its own documentation attached to it. So in this case, we have file system and the function is readme, and I just printed the documentation only for the readme function. Now I could do the same thing for the read function if I can type it. And now it prints the documentation just for the read, and the link will point me directly to that function in the browser. So that is for the core functions. Another thing that already worked a long time now is the source property, which in case of the core functions only prints the source code highlighted without any extra information, because I do not have necessarily the source code of Node on the user's machine, since it doesn't come bundled with Node. Now let's look at the modules that you install with npm, because things are slightly different there, as we saw, and some features actually work somewhat better. So let's take the marked module, which is actually used to render the README to the REPL. So as I showed, if I execute the docs here, it will render the README right into your REPL. That's mainly if you want to quickly review some example because you forgot some detail how this worked. However, if you want to read it in more detail, just click on this link. However, it may be that we are actually offline. Like, let's say we are coding from the New York subway, or we are on a hack and hike and we don't have internet. Well, replpad is smart enough to notice that, and what it will do is it will render the README to a local file as well, because it doesn't make sense to just give me the GitHub URLs if I can't go there. So what I can do here is I can click on that file and read the locally rendered README right in my browser without having to be online. So there are certain properties that can be defined relating to the README. So the config of replpad has a specific setting for this. So the README has two settings that you can define. One is the render. If I turn render off, it will no longer render the docs to the REPL. Instead, it will just give me the URLs. And let me actually go back online here just in case. Now, the other setting that I can change is the open setting. If I tell replpad to open, it will automatically open the README of the docs without me having to click on the URL. Now, of course, these properties can be defined in the REPL config, which in my case is in my home folder. replpad config, and at the very bottom you can see that the README config is right here, and in this case render by default and I don't open by default. If you change that, next time you start up replpad, these settings will default to whatever you change it to. And just to be clear, these settings are defined in the file that replpad tells you right at the top here. Now let's look at the source property, which is also very interesting. So in this case, let's look at the express logger. So first of all, we have to require express again. So the express has a logger function. As you can see, it is a function, although a lot of other things are attached to it. But since it is a function, replpad attached the source property to it. Now if I execute that, it will render the source code, including the JS docs, which is useful if you want to quickly review how the logger works, maybe, and what options you can pass it and so on. But let's say, like you're kind of reading this code right here and you're wondering, it sets it to the default if I don't provide a format. So what is the default if I want to kind of figure out quickly without having to read a lot of documentation? So what I can do is I can open this file by clicking on it. And as you can see, I'm using MacVim here as my UI editor, which basically understands what the :90 means. So it will automatically already go to the line. If your editor does not support these kind of things, or command clicking on this path here doesn't work out for you, you can always just copy and paste it to your editor and open it that way. Now let's go here and log out what the format is, right? So now it's saved, and in order to correctly re-require everything, we're going to get out of replpad. Now replpad will re-require express automatically, but this file is actually defined in, you can kind of see that up here, it's actually defined in the connect module, and this may not be properly refreshed automatically, so we restart replpad. One other thing to notice is that since we opened the file right in the path where it's defined, we have now the perfect context in our editor for looking at related files, which is also very useful if you're trying to debug some module you don't fully understand. So now let's replpad again here, and let's require express again. And now we'll execute that logger, and we should see that now the format property is logged out as we define it, which is very useful. One last thing to mention is that these features are fully implemented starting in replpad 10, which also means that you may not have these settings because you may have settings from an older version of replpad. In that case, I suggest you either delete your settings, which will cause replpad to rewrite them, or to just edit your settings to include the readme config if you want it. And of course, in order to use all the features that I just showed you, you should upgrade your replpad to version 0.10. Thanks for watching, and have a good day.